Okay, so we're starting with Benjamin tonight, and Benjamin, of course, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Jacob has 12 sons, and among those 12 sons, he also has four wives, two wives and two concubines, but they're counted as wives in all essence. And then you have Joseph, the firstborn, and we've spent a lot of time talking about Joseph, and then we come, of course, to Benjamin tonight. And Benjamin, if you look at the names of the Bible names, they're still real popular. I haven't met an Abraham in a while, but Abe is pretty popular. Isaac has certainly been very popular. Jacob in the last 15 or 20 years has become popular. And then, of course, you always have Joseph. And Benjamin is another popular name. I'm trying to think if there's anybody else among the 12. You might get Judah, which might show up as Jude. Hardly Judah ever, but Jude is a popular name. And that's just the New Testament equivalent. But you hardly ever hear, I don't know, have you ever met a Gad? Maybe an Asher, that may be even a girl's name sometimes. But Benjamin's one of those names that pops out, that's popular, and tonight we're going to learn about him. Now, the first thing we learn about him is sort of sad, in fact. If you look at Genesis 35, if you already turned there, it says in verse 19, and Rachel died and was buried in the way of Ephrathah, which is Bethlehem. And she's dying in childbirth, which is not as common today as it was in the earlier part of the last century and back into the 1800s and 1700s when they didn't have the ability. But even in this time of the Bible, you hardly ever read that. It's not to say it didn't happen. You know it happened. But as far as God making a record of it happening, it's unique. It's rare. And so Rachel is giving birth to Benjamin. And in fact, she's going to name him something else. Verse 17, it came to pass when she was in hard labor that the midwife said unto her, fear not, for thou shalt have this son also. And it came to pass as her soul was departing, for she died. Now there's a passage for you to show you what happens at death. The soul departs while the body stays. So that doctrinally is important to notice. And she called his name Benini, and his father called him Benjamin. Now Benjamin means, by name, the son of my right hand. Son of my right hand. And he's making a statement by that Rachel is his right hand. We hear about right hand man. Well, he had a right hand woman. When Stonewall Jackson was killed in the Civil War, and word got to Robert E. Lee that General Jackson, he got shot by friendly fire. He got a little too far out in front of his folks, and when he was coming back, it wasn't made clear, and some soldier panicked, thought he was the enemy and shot him. Well, when Robert E. Lee found out that Stonewall Jackson was dead, he said, you've taken my right arm. And of course, after that, it turned bad for the South, losing him. So the son of my right hand just shows you the importance of Rachel in the life of Jacob. Now that leads us to the fact, which maybe tend to be overlooked. I know I've overlooked it in the past. He grew up with no mother. So when he's born, his mother is dead. So he never had the holding and the caressing and the care that his mother had. I don't know who took him in. I'm sure one of the other three ladies did. Here she has a handmaid. Don't know who that handmaid is. Maybe it's Bilhah, Zilpah. Maybe it's one of those that are help take care of him, help raise him. I guess you would imagine, family being family, that it would be natural for Leah to take him and raise him. I mean, it's her nephew or sister's son. But the Bible doesn't say. It's all guesswork. It's all guesswork. But nonetheless, no matter who raised him, he never had Rachel. And is that going to affect him as he goes through life? Oh, yeah. I mean, you can't lose your mother at a young age and not be affected by it in some means. And he ends up being quite a warrior, as we say, and we'll see. And maybe that's part of the reason why. I mean, we can't get into the psychology of it. We don't know much enough about the psychology to make an assessment or a diagnosis, but it's a pretty good guess that you go from a man who has no mother to him being called a wolf. And that's what he's called in Deuteronomy or Genesis. Turn to Genesis 49, and here's Jacob's last will and testament. And we've done this for all the tribes so far in looking at what God has to say to them. And also get, if you will, Deuteronomy 33. Deuteronomy 33. But first of all, look at Genesis 49, and when it talks about Benjamin, it's verse 27. Benjamin shall raven as a wolf. In the morning he shall devour the prey, and at night he shall divide the spoil. Now look at Deuteronomy 33, and while you're turning there, I'll just call out what it says there. It says he will devour and he will divide. So the devouring is the nighttime, the wolf at night. Remember in the Bible, you always have to remember the night comes before the day. Night first, and then the day. And that's 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. Jewish time, Jerusalem time. And then the day is 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And we get that from the book of Genesis chapter 1, where it says the evening and the morning were the first day. The evening and the morning were the second day. So evening always comes first. We're messed up. We can't think that way. But that that makes a lot more sense, really, when you think about how time should be kept. We'll never change it. But us Gentiles, we just mess it up because we'll say it's 2 a.m. Good morning. It's morning after midnight. Am I right? Good morning. Well, it's the middle of the night, dummy. But we say good morning. So when's it night? Well, I guess from the time the sun goes down till midnight. And then it's morning the rest of the time. Well, for them, it's when the sun comes up. Good morning. Well, we still say that when it's 6 a.m. But here, I guess if we go to bed at 2 a.m., we'll say good night, but we're going to sleep. But the nighttime and the day. So he's devouring at night. You're less likely to see a wolf in the daytime. Now you might. Can't say it can't happen. But around here, you can hear at times wolves. And you hear them howling. Nothing gets your skin up. Much more. I've never been a deer hunter, but deer hunters who have talked to me says, man, when you hear them wolves, especially if they're close, it just gets all over you. So he's got to pray. That's going to be at nighttime. And he's going to have a spoil. That's going to be in the daytime. And we're going to find that to be true for Benjamin, but that sort of sets the standard for him that he is going to be a wolf. Now, Deuteronomy 33, and it says this in verse 12. Put this up here. 33:12. It says something quite interesting about Benjamin. And of Benjamin, he said, the beloved of the Lord shall dwell in safety by him. The Lord shall cover him all the day long, and he shall dwell between the shoulders. So we often put the city of Jerusalem connected with Judah. But the way the thing is laid out by Joshua, in the book of Joshua, Jerusalem actually becomes part of the tribe of Benjamin. And here we have a prophecy of that in Deuteronomy, that the Lord is always going to be a protector of him and that city. A lot of important cities are in Benjamin, Jericho being one of them, Jerusalem being another, and there's others. we won't go to, but geographically it's an important part of the nation of Israel. Now we go to the book of Judges, and here's where it gets most interesting about him. Let's start in Judges chapter 3, so we're not going back and forth. And we have there's really 4 great people come from this tribe, and we'll start with Ehud. Judges chapter 3. Judges chapter 3, when I was raising my boys, it was the favorite Bible story I could tell them. They loved this Bible story. And it's a story about Ehud and Eglon. Judges chapter 3, 12 through 30. And here's how the story goes. We won't take time to read it. I can tell it to you pretty fast. Ehud is raised up to be a judge of Israel. And the judges serve from the time of the prophet dying, Moses, and Joshua dying. Then the judges take over. And the judges serve all the way up until King Saul is reigned. So God sets these judges up, and they'll they're famous. Gideon, Samuel is a judge as well, so I didn't misspeak. But Ehud's one of the first. He's not the first, but he's one of the first that stands out. And they're under the service of Moab, and Moab has this king, and this king is a fat, obese king. So just picture somebody you've seen who's just overweight. He sits down and his blob comes all over his body. You know, you've seen a few people like that around. And so this king, he's sitting there. I think about Star Wars and that king, whatever his name was. Y'all remember what his name was? I don't remember. Jabba the Hutt. Yeah, so Jabba's sitting there, and that's sort of how I picture Eglon. And Eglon's there, and Ehud comes up and says, I've got an important message for the king of Moab. And it's so important that he says, I've got to have all my staff out, the chief of staff, all my guards, all my bodyguards go out. I've got to have them go out, and they go out, and they close the door, and he locks it. And he comes over and he whispers to him. And he's left-handed. A lot of these Benjamites are left-handed. And he's left-handed. And he comes in and leans in to tell that king a story. And he says, the God of Israel judge thee, and sticks his dagger right in his gut. And the Bible says, this is little Korah's favorite part, when the dirt comes out. Now, I don't know if that's his guts. I don't know if that's because he's dirty and he hadn't bathed. I don't know if it's what's coming out. But the Bible describes it as the dirt coming out. And my favorite part of the story is he can't get the knife out. And I picture him, I'm crazy, but I picture him putting both feet on the sides of that flab and trying to get his knife out of there. And he can't do it because the fat has closed in on the blade. And so there he is gurgling and dying, and he's got to get out of there. So he slips out the other way, and they come up, and his bodyguards knock on the door, and they can't get him awake. And they said, well, he must be taking a nap. He must be sleeping. So they leave him alone a little while, and he bleeds out on the floor. And God uses Ehud to be a judge of Israel. And he wins that great victory, and he serves them for several years. Well, Ehud is a member of the tribe of Benjamin. Now we go to Judges 20, and just some of this gets real peculiar. If we look at Judges chapter 20, look at verse 15. And the children of Benjamin were numbered at that time out of the cities 26,000 men that drew the sword beside the inhabitants of Gibeah, which were numbered 700 chosen men. Among all these people, there were 700 chosen men left-handed. So Ehud's left-handed. These guys left-handed. Everyone could sling stones at an hairbreadth and not miss. That does not say handbreadth. That's about the size of a target. If you're shooting an arrow, got about a handbreadth, maybe a little bigger as a target. Shooting a gun, got a target out there. Probably a little bigger than a handbreadth. They can throw it within a hair's breadth. Now, I would pull out a hair and show you an example, but I can't. But you get it. how thin is a hair? You hold it up, you look at it. It's smaller than that finger, right? And they can make it and not miss. You got 700 guys who can throw within a hair's breadth at you. You're going to die. Because they're going to stone you to death with stones. They're just going to sling them at you and sling at you. If they're throwing spears, whatever it is they're doing is their weapon. They're warriors. The wolf. And so that's one of the things that shows up about him. And then there's this strange story about a concubine who gets, they're at Gibeah. This is the last part, the Benjamites in this chapter. A woman from Gibeah, she's a woman who comes in and she serves, and so she goes into this man's house, and the Benjamites, the Gibeonites, they rape her. And so this guy who's responsible for this woman cuts her up into 12 pieces. You ever read this in the Bible? You want to read Jerry Springer? Watch Jerry Springer. I got this. Cuts her up in 12 pieces and mails them all to the 12 tribes of Israel. Special delivery. Open it up, there's a hand. Open it up, there's her foot. Open it up, there's her heart. Open it up, there's her head. I don't know who got lucky enough to get the head. But then they all get angry. I mean, how could you do this? No such thing's ever been done. And so all 11 tribes gather together, and they're going to go up and fight Benjamin. And when they get up there to fight Benjamin, they go the first day, and Benjamin wipes out 27,000, I think it is, 20-something thousand, wipes out all 11 tribes. One tribe, the littlest tribe, the smallest tribe, the wolf, kills them on the first day. Here's an interesting thing about prayer. They say, Lord, should we go up the second day? And the Lord says, go on, go get them. And they go up there the second day and they whoop the fire out of them again. Another 10, 15, 20,000 lost. 2 days of losses. And God told them to go both times. Sometimes when you pray for the will of the Lord and the Lord says, yeah, go on, you're going to get sacked. You're going to lose. Forget about all these preachers who tell you you're going to always be a winner. Because God's using Benjamin to get them. So then on the third day, I mean, they're discouraged. They've lost 40,000 men. Mighty warriors. Should we go the third day? The Lord says, go the third day, and this time I'll let you win. And they wipe out Benjamin down to 600 men. Wipe them out. 600 men are left. So now they're afraid. The Israelites are afraid. They've made a vow, no woman of our tribes will marry the tribes of Benjamin. So now they're concerned that the tribe of Benjamin is going to be wiped out because there's no women for them to marry. All they've left is 600 men. So they say, what are we going to do? So they come up with this scheme. Y'all ever heard of Sadie Hawkins Day? Now that's where the women chase the men, right? Sadie Hawkins. Wish I could get in on that deal. So all the women are chasing the men, and whoever catches the man marries the man. But this time it's reversed. They go down there among their enemies, and they separate out the enemy, all the women who have not known a man, and they say, boys, if you catch them, they're yours. And they go, imagine wild fighters, wolves coming out of them hills, chase those women down, and there's no going to the dad and say, hey, can I have this woman's hand to marry him? It's just, if you tackle them, you got them. And they all do except a few, and then they make arrangements for the rest of them to get a bride as well. But that's Benjamin. Benjamin's a wolf. He's a wild man. He's not somebody you want to, you want him on your side if there's a fight. And he might be the smallest and he might be the youngest, but boy, the Lord has made him a fighter. Turn to 1 Chronicles chapter 1. 1 Chronicles chapter 8. chapter 8. And the sons of Ulam were mighty men of valor, archers, and had many sons and sons' sons, 150. All these were the sons of Benjamin. What are they? They're warriors. They're fighters. 1 Chronicles 8:40. And then 1 Chronicles 12:2. And it says there at the end of the verse, there's Saul. Of course, Saul is from the tribe of Benjamin. We learned that from chapter 9 of 1 Samuel. But here is Saul, son of Kish. He's a Benjamite. That's verse 1. 1 Chronicles 12:1, and they were among mighty men, helpers of the war, and they were armed with bows and could use both the right hand and the left in hurling stones and shooting arrows out of the bow, even Saul's brethren of Benjamin. So they're ambidextrous. Doesn't matter. They get this arm cut off, they'll come at you with this arm. They get wounded in this arm, they'll come at you with this arm. You got to get both arms. So that's 1 Chronicles chapter 12, verse 2. And I won't chase this on down. You got the references. 2 Chronicles 14:8 and 17:17 just continues to tell you the same thing, that these are warriors. Now Saul is a disappointment. He stands head and shoulders above all the others. And they say, man, we want this guy to be king. Now they chose him and not God. God said, wait for David. They're not going to wait for David. Now he didn't say that specifically. He just said, wait for me to choose the king. No, we want this guy. And Saul starts out, I mean, you read his life, chapter 10, chapter 11. He goes along there pretty well, but then he gets away from it. Ends up demon possessed. Ends up trying to kill David, ends up dead in a field, tries to kill his own son. It's just a mess for the life of Saul. But he's really of the four that we name in Scripture, he's really the only one. He could have been a good man. Could have been. He had it in him. But he just wandered away from the Lord and tried to do it his own way instead of trusting the Lord. Then we have Queen Esther. A lot of folks don't know Queen Esther is from the tribe of Benjamin, but that's told you in chapter 2, verses 5 through 4, that she's from Kish, who was Saul's dad, and on down the line, she's from the tribe of Benjamin, and we know her. She stood up to save the whole nation. She is the type of Christ, and the only female type of Christ in the Bible I've ever been able to find. And she goes in and says, if I perish, I perish. If I die, I die. But I'm going to give my life for the country. That's what happened with Abraham's son Isaac. If I die, I die. I'm a living sacrifice. Well, she became a living sacrifice. You know how the story goes. Great book, 10 chapters in the book of Esther, and how she and overcame Haman's duplicity and treachery and ended up delivering the nation. And then, of course, the crown jewel is Paul the Apostle. He started out as Saul, ironically, but he ends up being named Paul in Acts chapter 13. And he says in Romans 11:1 and again in Philippians 3, 4, and 5 that he is of the tribe of Benjamin. And he's just like Benjamin, a wolf, devouring. That's how it starts out. It starts out by... His story starts out in Acts chapter 6, Acts chapter 7, of him going and gathering together the Jews and who are believers, Christians, and delivering them up for death and torture and torment and taking everything they've got. But then when the Lord saves him, he completely turns around and goes, man, I'm going to take that same zeal that I've got for killing the Jews, and now I'm going to try to save them. And he becomes the apostle of the Gentiles, and we're still reaping the benefit of his ministry today, and he's gathering the spoils. I mean, every person who's ever been led to Christ comes through Paul. That's going to be quite a haul on Judgment Seat of Christ Day, when Paul gets credit for everybody who's been saved through Romans. Can you imagine? Everybody who's been saved through Ephesians. Everybody who's grown in grace through reading his epistles, it's going to be something. So that's Paul. Now, I guess I would wrap this up by saying this about Benjamin. God sees what man cannot see. He even tells Saul of Benjamin that in 1 Samuel. He says, a man looketh on the outward appearance, but God looketh on the heart. So sometimes man will look at a person and see, well, they're the youngest, and they're the runt of the family. They're the littlest. They're the smallest. They're the least one you would ever recognize in the room. You got Reuben in the room, the oldest. You got Judah in the room. You got Simeon and Levi. Both are fighters and both are loud. And then over here somewhere on the side, you got Benjamin. Jacob didn't learn from his mistake. That's another thing I'd want to point out in the study. Because Jacob, made Joseph his favorite. He made him a coat of many colors. Now that's a type of Christ, and we're not diminishing it. But all the other brothers saw that Jacob was the favorite. And they were jealous of him, and they were envious of him. But then when Jacob dies, he starts doing the same thing with Benjamin. Remember when he's sending all the brothers down to Egypt to get food? Who's he keep behind? Benjamin. I don't blame him. I'm not casting rocks at him, He's the only son of Rachel, his beloved, left. And so he wants to protect him. I get it. But sometimes you got to let a kid grow up and be their own person, make their own decisions, make their own way. And Benjamin turned out all right. He had some rough times. Almost got wiped out as a tribe because he got on the wrong side of the tracks, choosing the wrong thing. But in the end, he ends up producing the Apostle Paul. Imagine that tribe wiped out. Of course, God wasn't going to let that happen. That tribe gets wiped out. One of those 600 that survived was the progenitor of Paul the Apostle. Something to think about. So my point is, God sees what no man can see. People see the youngest and the smallest. What God saw from the start was a warrior. And the Lord can take anybody's circumstances, no matter what the circumstances are, and turn them around for good. It doesn't matter if your mother died when you were young. It doesn't matter, unfortunately, tragically, criminally, a person was abused as a child. That kind of thing can be turned around in the end to bring glory to God, because it makes you tougher and it makes you stronger and it makes you stand up. I don't know if you've ever read the book. I can't highly recommend it enough, but it's called David and Goliath by Malcolm Gladwell. And what he tells in those stories are people who seem to be on the weak end of the scale, and they end up being the victor. And he starts out with David and Goliath, how we've always made Goliath to be the favored and David to be the underdog. And so it's gone through sports and any kind of competition ever since. David beat Goliath like it's an upset. It's an overthrow. And Gladwell, who's a Jew, he's not a Christian, but he comes to the conclusion, I think he's right, that David had every advantage. Because there's Goliath all in that grass, and David comes running toward him. So this guy's, okay, I've got it. First of all, he's on the ground. 1 Samuel 17, he's got to get up. He doesn't even put his helmet on, if you read the passage close, and here comes David. And he's killed a bear. He's caught a lion by the mouth, This is not some come too soon kid. Takes that thing and it's like a 45 bullet. Hits him right there in the head. So the point is, God can take what looks to be a disadvantage and make it to your advantage. There's one man, I can't remember his name. There was one man who was raised rough. And no dad, and his mother paid no attention to him. He had a woman who came in and took care of him while his mom was at work. He hardly knew his mother, and one day his mother comes in and says that this lady who's been taking care of him won't be coming back anymore. Well, that was his mama. Emotionally, she's taken care of him all his life. And all of a sudden, one day she's gone. And so this boy grew up and he got a hard heart where he didn't care what anybody thought about him. And he became a medical doctor. And in becoming that medical doctor, he began deciding there had to be some cure for leukemia in children. There just had to be. And he began doing these experiments. And everybody thought he'd lost his mind. Everybody wanted him to lose his license. But that man didn't care what anybody thought because of the way he was raised. And because he didn't care what anybody thought, fellow doctors, nurses, people who wouldn't have anything to do with him, people who wouldn't speak to him, people who were accusing him of killing children, because that guy had the wherewithal to continue that fight, he came up with a cure. Great book, David and Goliath, by Malcolm Gladwell. And there's stories like that throughout that book, that God can take something that looks awful, a tragedy, a guy's mother died, he doesn't know her his whole life. Somebody else has to raise him. And he becomes a great warrior for the Lord. One of the greatest in all the Bible. So look up. Things are bad. Things are hard. Things are tough. I won't try to diminish it for anybody in here because I don't know your background. But I know the Lord can take that and turn you into a warrior for Jesus Christ. So hang in there. All right?